Hello everyone and welcome back. It is finally time for me to do the big grand reveal of the 1920s capsule wardrobe that I have been working on for more than 9 months at this point, sewing and planning and preparing everything for a nearly month-long trip where I was going to be wearing nothing but that capsule wardrobe through the UK on a vintage cruise where things were going to have formal and informal events and just a huge range of weather and different types of things that my clothing needed to do. So I have finally returned from my trip and I am ready to share the results with you. If you haven't followed along the process or you want to binge it all again, there is a vintage playlist that has everything that I've been working on for this trip all laid out nicely. There are some other videos in there from earlier as well, but frankly, a lot of those were pieces that also went on this trip, so it's sort of like an extended version if you watch the whole thing. But as for the trip itself, I figured we should first go over what I actually generally did. What did the clothing have to keep up with? Then I'm going to show you the full lookbook, everything that I wore every single day, lots of footage of the actual trip as well in there. Then we'll end with a nice discussion about what worked and what didn't, because that's a pretty hefty list on both sides. The trip itself originated with a vintage cruise, specifically a group called Ahoy Vintage Cruises that organizes events on board the Queen Mary 2, which is a transatlantic ship. So we went from Southampton, England over to New York, and while on the regular cruise, there were all sorts of vintage events planned. And specifically the headliner for this particular cruise was Dandy Wellington and his jazz band. So that is specifically where this whole thing started. And in fact, being brutally honest with you, it started last fall when I was in New York in October and was hanging out with a lot of wonderful people who are beautifully fashioned. And I honestly felt a little disappointed in myself for the week. I wore a lot of modern clothes, a lot of things that I hadn't made, and though I was fashionable, I wasn't feeling myself, and I wasn't happy with it. And as we were talking about the cruise for a year ahead, I realized I was going to need to not only make an entire capsule wardrobe for the cruise itself and whatever trip it gets planned around, but for myself, for every day, for things that are going to make me happy to put on when I go out and do things. So that is the point of this capsule wardrobe beyond just this trip. It's meant to extend into a lot of my regular wardrobe and help me feel a bit more myself. So I came at this with big plans. And the trip itself kept growing and growing. So essentially what happened was I was gone for 3.5 weeks. It started in early October, and the first day I took off and actually flew to Indiana to meet my friend Abby, who was going on this entire trip with me. We were going to eventually be meeting up with a lot of other people as well, but starting off in Indiana because I live on the West Coast and it is a trek to get to Europe, so it only makes sense for me to take it in 2 legs. Stopped off at her place for a couple of days before we traveled on to Edinburgh. And that is where we arrived on Friday and didn't leave until the following Thursday. Granted, while we were there, we did lots of different things. We walked around downtown, we went to Stirling Castle, we went to the Edinburgh Portrait Gallery, as well as took a essentially 1-day trip over to Glasgow by train, where we spent the night there and then walked around Glasgow University, looking at the different museum exhibitions there, seeing some of the different things that were around campus because Abby did go to graduate school there, so she's pretty familiar with it. And then we actually spoke with some of the students in the fashion and textile history program there. So that was a wonderful little side trip while we were there. Then we made our way back to Edinburgh and the next day got on a train to head down to Leicester. And we went over to the Leicestershire Museum Collections, which is just outside of town, got to look at a lot of lovely antiques. There will be more on that in the near future. And traveled from there down to London, where we met up with the much larger group. So there are a lot of different people that sort of amassed themselves in London all at the same time. Lots of group dinners, lots of catching up with friends that we don't normally get to see before a large number of us boarded a ship in Southampton. This was 2 weeks after I had started my trip at this point, and it was a 7-day cruise from Southampton over to New York. Not only were the regular cruise events occurring, but the general schedule on the cruise ship for the vintage events was jam-packed. I admit I did not manage all of them because there was just so much to do. On the average day, you could wake up, be at dance class, at 9 o'clock in the morning because they had a wonderful group over from Singapore teaching different styles of Lindy Hop. Then following that, you could take a stroll about the outside decks, then meet up for lunch, then go to one of the many afternoon classes where Dandy or some of the band members talked about music theory and listening to jazz and understanding it, or vintage fashion, all sorts of different, essentially little tiny master classes. From there, you could go as a group to the formal tea. Then you would very quickly go to your room and change and show up to the evening events, which were usually large performances by Dandy Wellington and his band, or things like chocolate exchanges and meet and greets. Then you went to dinner as a group. Then there were sometimes even things after that. Now, that would have meant that I was out of my room and going solid from pretty much 9 a.m. until about midnight every night, and I am too old and too tired for that. And we definitely realized the amount of time you spent just getting dressed and changing on this trip for the different events was overwhelming. So I didn't do everything every day, but I tried to be involved in a lot of the different events, and especially when it came to the performances, be present for those, because those are really special and unusual events. Generally, you don't have bands like that playing to that large of an audience, that many people who are going to get up and dance, and really it became a wonderful level of participation after night after night after night of this that you really can't experience anywhere else. So that was the main body of the trip, was that cruise. That was the point in a way. And at the tail end of that, we offloaded in New York City and spent another 3 days meeting up with people and hanging out with friends and just generally getting to enjoy a little bit of time with people before we headed home. So all in all, it was 3.5 weeks for me, and a lot of different types of travel: planes, trains, automobiles, ships, and everything in between, it seems. So my wardrobe had to keep up with this. It had to keep up with all of this happening in October, which is an unpredictable month when it comes to weather. That's going to be a big discussion point when we get to the end of this, but I figure first I should take a little bit of time and go over what I wore every day, because that's a lot of clothing. I actually kept track of what I was supposed to wear every day by keeping a spreadsheet going the entire trip. Not only of what I planned to roughly wear, but what I actually did wear, moving things around and switching things around as the weather changed or situations changed, what we were doing that day changed. So I have a very thorough record of all of my decisions. Without further ado, here's my complete and total lookbook. I did refilm everything I wore because there was just no way I was going to have a consistent way of showing you every single day, but there is tons of footage from the actual trip paired up with each one of these outfits. All in all, I have a lot of different pieces for the capsule wardrobe, but it really starts with my 3 suits. Each one of the suits has its own skirt, so the black, the green, and the red tweed. Then I have 5 pairs of trousers. The black and the green go with the suits. I have a brown tweed, a blue linen, and a black pair of cotton sateen. Both the blue linen and the black sateen are meant to be more casual wear, things that I'd be wearing on lazier days. Then, of course, the 3 suit jackets, the black, the green, and the red tweed, and in the case of the tweed will also serve as outerwear for this trip. I do have a separate cape to cover any of these in case of rain, but I've talked about that at length in a previous video. And then I have what I'm considering my everyday shirts. There's 4 collared shirts, 2 of which are from Madewell, 2 of which are from Vacona Vintage. I absolutely adore those 2 and definitely am getting more. And then a black cotton with embroidery from Voryag, which is going to be part of my more casual attire, but the collared shirts are meant to be layered with the sweaters and jackets. I then also have 7 silk shirts. This is the one place I probably overdid it. These all got worn at least once on the cruise. Thought I was going to get more use out of them, but the weather ended up being so much warmer and more humid than I expected, so I was really only able to comfortably wear them on the cruise ship, unfortunately. Over all of these come the sweaters. I have a cardigan, which I've knitted the collar and cuffs in order to be decorative, 2 plain square neckline sweaters from Madewell, the fancy design sweater from Walker Slater, which I picked up the first day in Edinburgh, and then also my velvet trimmed cotton tunic. I also have 3 dresses, a very plain short sleeve black silk, a fancier red silk, and a wool crepe in light blue, which is in 2 pieces, both the short sleeve dress and the long sleeve jacket that go over it. So essentially it's 2 really fancy and 1 simple that will go with just about any combination of things that I need it to. I also have 3 vests, 1 in a wool stripe, 1 in a plain wool, and then a silk stripe. The 2 wools are of course plain to go with the suits, and the silk stripe is to go with the black suit or the black dress, whatever I might need to change up the style of a little bit. I then have 3 evening gowns, which I have talked about in a previous video as well. Black velvet, purple velvet, and a yellow and gold silk. These covered me for the 3 major formal nights on the cruise. I got a lot of questions about what I was wearing underneath of these things for support garments and basic undergarments. I've made a variety of different shorts and chemises to go underneath layers as need be. I'm not going to wear it under everything, but some things do need them. These were all practical to layer underneath things like corsets or girdles, or the shorts if I'm, say, dancing in a skirt. I also brought along 4 of these undershirts from Numi, which actually have little armpit guards in them, so that way I'm not sweating into my silk shirts, because these are way easier to wash on the go than my nice clothes. As for these foundation garments, I have the black corset and I have the beige bra that I made previously, but that wasn't going to cut it for everything. I did also get just a regular elastic girdle from what Katie did, and then in terms of bust support, I tried a variety of different modern options, from sports bras from the Girlfriend Collective that were a bit more compressive, or a couple of bandeau or bralette styles from Parade as well. So these were the ones that I found to be the most successful and carried me through a lot of different outfits. I also had quite a few different types of stockings and tights. I relied a lot on wool or silk tights, but I have a few pairs of stockings as well as some sheers for more formal events. All of the shops that have similar things are going to be linked down below for pretty much everything I've talked about that wasn't made by me. I also have 3 slips that are meant to go underneath my evening or plain black dress, but they also function under really any of my day dresses as need be as well. I also brought along 2 robes that would do over pajamas for early morning, or other outfits that might need a little bit more warmth, but nothing quite as structured as, say, a suit jacket or as heavy as a sweater. Then 6 pairs of shoes, my 1922 boots, my brand new walking Oxfords, my light blue heels, my black witchy heels. I got a gold pair of dancing shoes from Remix Vintage, and of course my brown boots from Joe Bear Boots. So that gives me 3 pairs of really great walking shoes, great pair of dancing shoes with the gold, and then the 2 pairs of heels cover pretty much everything I might need to wear on the cruise. Finally, I have the hats, 3 structured hats and 3 crocheted hats. So that way I was good for just about any circumstance, but honestly, I didn't wear them that much. It was so much warmer than I expected, and this was the first thing to go out the window, unfortunately. It was also really windy on the cruise ship, so I couldn't wear them there that much. As for the outfits, we're starting off with my travel days. I had just a pair of jersey knit pants, my long cardigan, and a t-shirt or something simple like that. I had to wear the black hat because it didn't fit my luggage, and a pair of black flats. This is mostly just regular travel attire for me, aside from the addition of the hat and the cardigan that kind of zazz it up a little bit. Then I also had my casual day attire, which was the Voryog shirt and trousers. I wore this when I was in Indiana because it was warmer weather while I was there, as well as just around the cabin, around the flat, anything where I just needed more casual attire. So I don't really have pictures of that. The very first day we were in Edinburgh, I threw on my brown tweed trousers, my brown sweater, my tweed jacket, and a scarf for warmth, as well as my boots for walking around. This was a really quick casual outfit since we had literally just gotten off of an overnight flight. But it did well for keeping me warm and for being in layers that meant that I could change up depending on what I needed. This tweed jacket and a couple of scarves that I had were pretty much interchanged constantly throughout the trip to warm up or cool down. We had a lovely afternoon walking around the city, and I got to go to Walker Slater, at which I purchased that sweater that you saw earlier, as well as a number of ties that you're going to see throughout the rest of this capsule wardrobe. Next up, we went to Stirling Castle, and I wore my complete tweed suit with the skirt, Joe Bear boots, because we're going to be walking on uneven ground, and great example of one of the brand new ties, as well as just a simple modern striped shirt, and the hat to set it all off. Stirling Castle was absolutely lovely, and we had such a wonderful time exploring all of the different rooms and the gardens. Next up was a day in. I just put on my tweed trousers and black sweater, and when we went out to go grab lunch, threw on a vintage scarf and my black crocheted cap. No footage of this, but a simple outfit. The next big day, we were going to the portrait gallery, so I dressed up a little bit with my green suit, wearing the skirt, the Oxfords, a black sweater, and the black cap, as well as a vintage necklace to really bring about the vintage flair to it. And we not only spent a good portion of the day wandering about the portrait galleries, but we were actually able to get out and do a photo shoot with the cape and with the suit as well. So you can see how this outfit can be dressed up or dressed down with different layers depending on the weather and what's needed at that exact moment, because that cape and that jacket are small enough that they fold up and fit into my bag, and away I go. The next day we were getting onto the train and heading into Glasgow. I knew that I wanted to take my black suit with me for the next day, so it was easy to wear it that day. I wore the trousers with it and the brown vest, as well as the striped shirt and one of my brand new ties. The next day I put on the same suit jacket, but with the skirt this time, the Oxfords again, and one of the Vacona vintage shirts, and a tie for a little pop of color. This outfit managed me on a pretty difficult day weather-wise. It started off cold and rainy and then warmed up a lot. The only problem that I had with this is that my shoes really weren't well suited to campus cobblestones. As I found out, Glasgow, a lot more cobblestones than Edinburgh. But I brought along my cape and layered things up with the waistcoat portion of the cape in order to make sure that I was set for no matter what the weather brought me that day. And aside from wishing that I brought my boots, everything went well. The next day we were on the train down to Leicester, so I wanted to be comfortable for this, again with the tweed trousers and brown boots, and I put on my striped shirt and the new Walker Slater sweater over it. This was really the last cool day that we had on the entire trip, and so I'm glad I got to wear that sweater before we had to pack all of our warm weather attire deep down in the luggage. The next day we were headed into collections, so I wanted to wear something that would be comfortable all day, so I wore my green trousers with one of my Vacona shirts and my cardigan. We were warned it could be a little chilly in collections, but the nice thing is about the cardigan, I can push the sleeves back and keep them out of the way while I am working on the different garments, so I don't have to worry about that being a problem. As you can see, just rolled my sleeves back and I was ready to go. Stayed warm and comfortable all day in collections, as well as having a nice dinner afterwards. Then we were on the train down to London the next day, again lugging all my luggage around, knew I needed to be comfortable and able to walk easily, so back to the brown boots, tweed skirt, and the tan vest with a Vacona shirt, meaning that I could strip off layers. I started off with a tweed jacket, but that got removed pretty fast because once we got onto the train I realized it was getting warmer and warmer, and that tweed jacket wasn't going to come back out again. So layers were incredibly important for this trip. That evening, we were meeting up with a large group of people for a really nice dinner, so I grabbed my black silk dress, my 1922 walking boots, and I threw my black jacket over it in order to stay warm enough, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be really warm or really cold in that restaurant, so I wanted to make sure I was set either way. Next day in London, we did a lot of walking. We in fact walked a good way across the city to meet up with a few people for breakfast, and it was already a pretty warm and humid day, so I was definitely on the sweatier side. I'm glad I wore good walking shoes for that, but the layers that I was able to keep taking off that day really helped out. We also got caught in the rain, and thankfully most of my clothing survived that, though I did definitely smell like wet wool. The next day in London, I put on my very comfortable green suit again, with just a slightly different variation of shirt and tie. This was honestly the easiest way for me to keep changing up what I was wearing. 4 different similar shirts with a lot of different colors of ties. They go with every single suit. This was the core of my wardrobe, and I definitely could do more of this in the future. This was not a difficult day, thankfully, but it was a little cool in the morning, so I had my cape on in the morning, removed it once we got to Bernadette's, where we all just hung out as a group of friends for the day, and didn't really do all that much aside from go to dinner that evening. The day we were boarding the ship, I wanted to wear one of my hats again. It had just been too warm to wear any of them, hoping that it would perhaps be a little cooler by the sea. Spoiler alert, it really wasn't. I wore my tweed suit one last time, along with the wool striped vest, my walking boots, because again, moving a lot of luggage around and I wanted to be prepared, and my cloche hat. The jacket came off pretty early in the process. I didn't put it back on until we were well boarded and everything had started to cool down out on the deck, and so we were able to get out, get some photos, get some video of everybody, so that way we had a good record of everyone's boarding costumes, because most of us dressed up pretty fancy that afternoon once we got our luggage into our rooms. Evening was one of the more casual evenings, so I simply put on my black suit with my striped vest and a satin shirt that I have from Turn Black, which actually matches those satin trousers. So this was a fairly simple suit for the first night, pretty comfortable, and I ended up returning to a very similar version of this later, as you will see. For most of the mornings on board, I was wearing a pair of black satin pajamas, so I just threw on a black satin robe over the top. Sometimes I switched out for my satin trousers, but this was a really easy way to go grab coffee first thing in the morning, looking quite glamorous without having to put any effort in. I did, however, find out it's a little too windy out on deck for costumes like this, especially if you're trying to photograph them nicely, so yeah, that was definitely one of the issues with outside. The first full day on board, I wore my green suit with the skirt and my blue silk shirt along with my blue shoes. I really made heavy use of the black shoes and the blue shoes while on the cruise ship, since we weren't going to be walking any long distances, and they're very comfortable. They're just not going to hold up to the rougher streets and all of the walking we did. One of the most difficult things on the cruise was managing to actually get footage of all of the outfits. The cruise ship was just crammed with people, and there really weren't quiet areas to do that. That evening was the first formal attire. I was a black and white ball themed to Under the Moon, and I wore my black and gold velvet for that evening, which meant that it was pretty comfortable to get out there, dance, move around, and have fun that first evening with everyone there.
Yes, there's a wonderful chance of a lasting romance for me. If I ever deserve your attention, a single ray of light, mister, lend me your ear while I mention what is on my mind tonight.
The second day on board, with a very simple black skirt and my black silk blouse and my black shoes. I realized by this point it was going to be pretty warm on board. I was really concerned it would be cold, as a lot of my cruise ship experiences have been pretty chilly on board. This one was very much not, so I started having to alter what I was wearing most days in order to make it work. For that evening, it was a more casual night, so I just threw on one of the dresses that I knew I was going to be wearing for daytime later on in the week. I added a pair of heels with that and a red necklace to dress it up just a little bit. And in fact, my original plan for this dress was to also wear it one full day on the cruise ship, along with my large black hat. And there was a band that was made to go around that to match the shoes. I'm showing it off because I think it matches so wonderfully here, but I never actually got to wear it with the hat because it was so windy on board and so warm, hats just weren't an option. That was my dinner dress instead, and I did get a chance to wear it again later. The next day was the blue wool dress and jacket with my blue shoes. This was incredibly comfortable, and I know I'm going to be returning to this blue dress over and over again. I was a little sad that I didn't get to wear the jacket with other groupings, such as the trousers or other skirts from the suits, but I definitely will in the future. We did manage this day to find a really nice spot that wasn't too busy and had lovely light, so a small photo session was in order as well. That evening was another formal night, and I wore my purple velvet that night, which, as I've talked about before, is just such an incredibly comfortable outfit, and though I didn't do a lot of dancing in it, a full-sleeved velvet gown just wasn't quite up to that. But it was perfect for lounging around. The next day was starting to feel a little bit more casual, so I just put on my red silk blouse with a little lace inlay on the top, black wool trousers, and this is where I got to use one of my extra jackets. I wore this in the mornings occasionally as well, over the pajamas for breakfast, but it also made up really well for a day outfit. That evening, I just switched to my gold silk blouse, and that meant that I was able to get out on the dance floor a whole bunch that evening. I also got a lot of footage of the band playing from different angles. It was nice to not be in a long formal dress for one night, actually have some freedom of movement. The next day on board, I realized I should probably wear at least one of my hats one of the days, so I put on my green suit with a ivory silk blouse. It's got a lovely woven-in design to it, and I simply added the green hat to this. Again, tried to go out on deck, hoping it was perhaps a little less windy that day to get some footage. Not so much luck again. This was also our last formal night in which I wore my yellow and gold silk. It was a New Orleans themed party, but also had a shipwide performance afterwards that went until about midnight. So it was all around a crazy night. By the last day on board, things were feeling pretty casual, so it was a great time to pull out the black satin trousers and the tunic with the velvet. This was also an outfit that I wore to dance in the mornings, just because you get so warm wearing a full silk dress or silk blouse just wasn't an option, so I pulled out a couple of my t-shirts, wore them with the lightweight concertine trousers, and managed dance class pretty well considering. For that final evening, I pulled out my black silk dress again, super simple, super comfortable. I also wore my boots this time, just for something different, but they did surprisingly well on the dance floor again. So definitely really pleased with this particular pair of shoes. It's gotten me through so many cities and so much activity. The final day getting off the ship and going into New York City, I wasn't sure what the weather really was going to feel like. The answer was hot and humid, so I wore my black suit, the black hat again since I couldn't pack it, my red boots since I knew I could get around the city in those pretty easily, and added the black silk vest for something a little bit different. Then the next day was the green suit, again with the skirt this time, green Oxfords, because those did really well walking around smoother cities, and same sort of thing, different combination of a striped shirt and a colorful tie. This was at the point that we realized it was going to be pretty warm and humid the entire time we were in New York, so something lighter weight and more comfortable was in order over your jackets, tweeds, or sweaters.
I'm blending into the scenery today. You match.
The final day, I was over wearing pants, I was over making outfits, so this was a perfect time to bring back that red silk dress, which is an outfit unto itself, comfortable and cool in the weather, and looks incredibly fashionable with no effort. So that is the complete and total sum of everything that I wore on this trip, for better or worse. So that means it's time to talk about what worked and what didn't. First of all, the question that I have gotten a lot is, how do you even begin to pack for this? And the answer is you pack in layers, chunks essentially. So the way that I pack is a method that I learned a long time ago. It reduces wrinkles, it won't prevent them, but it will reduce them, where everything gets laid out on top of your bag completely open. You lay out a number of layers, and then you sort of fold all of the external parts in on themselves, like a happy little package. So that ends up reducing wrinkles. It's kind of like how you put antiques in boxes by stuffing around all of the folds with tissue paper. This is just using other clothing to stuff those folds. And I did this in layers. So the first bottom layer was the stuff that I was only going to need on the cruise. That was going to be hung up when everything got pulled out of my luggage. So I wasn't going to worry about that. It was going to get wrinkled no matter what. And in honesty, we did bring a steamer. It did break pretty early on, so we actually ended up going with the turn on the shower in the bathroom and close the door with the clothing hanging in there, and everything will let the wrinkles out. Essentially create a little steam closet. Then I had a layer of things that I was likely to be wearing in London, and then I had on top of that the things that I was going to immediately need when I got into Scotland. Everything else tends to work in cubes with the exception of the hat suitcase, because the hats need to not be crushed. So packed inside of them, packed around them. I could not fit my black hat in there though. The brim on that was just a little bit too large and would have needed a full-size suitcase, and I didn't want to take two full-sized ones because we were going to be getting onto lots of different trains and dragging these things around cobblestone roads. It was not going to be practical for me to take any more than I absolutely had to. So I wore the black hat or put it in a separate bag whenever I was traveling back and forth. And then my actual big carry-on was my camera equipment and all of my handmade shoes, because those are precious and dear to me, and while everything arrived luggage-wise and nothing was lost or delayed, there is always a fear of that, and I can't really replace those. That is the methodology that I went with, essentially tiering things in layers. As for the problems that I had, the big one was weather. We expected things to be a little bit colder than they ended up being. When we arrived in Scotland, it was in the low 50s, which is about what we figured. It was a little bit rainy on a couple of days, but generally pretty sunny, and the clothing that I brought for that worked well. However, by the end of our time there, it started to warm up. So as we traveled down to Leicester, it became apparent it was much warmer than we expected. The weather forecast by that point were showing that we were going to spend the next, essentially, week in the upper 60s, if not in the 70s. And it was humid. Very humid. So we managed all right in Leicester, but by the time we got down to London, those 3 days in London were incredibly humid and warm, and I had to start changing what I was wearing very quickly because wearing even just 2 layers was too much. There were definitely times on the go where I had to adjust what I was doing. The weather also meant that I wasn't wearing hats as much as I wanted to, because that warm weather continued not only in London, but in New York, and honestly for a good portion of the cruise as well. Some things didn't get used as much as I would have liked to use them, but they will be used in the future. I feel like I was prepared for a lot of different circumstances that didn't happen, but I managed everything that did happen, and I could have managed all of those. That means that this was a very thorough capsule wardrobe that is meant to not only just handle me on a trip for a month, but handle me through half of the year, quite honestly, and a lot of formal events or semi-formal events. And I'm going to feel like me. I'm going to feel like I'm comfortable in this clothing. It is the level of dramatics that I feel most comfortable in, and I'm so happy that I had an excuse to not only make all of these things but to wear them and to have such wonderful happy memories with them, because the trip was amazing. It did not all go as planned, rarely does it ever, but I had such a great experience, and I will be able to cherish every single one of these pieces for their memories alone. If you want to see more about the trip, because I know I didn't go into great detail, I did do a much longer vlog, kind of putting together a ton of footage and talking about what I did every day on the trip for my Patreon and for my YouTube members, if you want to go see that. Or I highly recommend going down to the links in my description for everyone else's channels. So you'll find Abby and Noelle, Morgan, and Nikki posting about the cruise itself on their YouTube channels, and tons of different footage from other people, especially on Instagram. Both Ahoy Vintage Cruises and Fascinating Voyage are great places to start with hashtags to see what everyone else was wearing for their trip, because there was such an amazing array of clothing present. It wasn't all vintage, and it certainly wasn't all from one specific decade. It was just all absolutely gorgeous to see everyone participate in their own interesting and unique way. I'll definitely be dropping lots more photos and video content over the coming months of some of the most exciting moments, but for now, this pretty well sums up my experimentation with my 1920s capsule wardrobe and managing this entire giant wonderful trip.
Thank you so much. If we don't see you tomorrow, we'll see you in New York. Stay around.